Most men don't feel their strength leaving. It doesn't happen in loud collapses or dramatic moments. It happens in silence, in small, invisible habits, in choices that felt noble, but left you hollow. You didn't wake up one day without masculine energy. You traded it, little by little, in the name of peace, survival, or love. And by the time you looked in the mirror, the man staring back wasn't leading anymore. He was tolerating, explaining, shrinking. This video isn't about weakness. It's about erosion. The slow kind. The kind no one notices until it's too late. It's the fatigue that sets in when you start choosing comfort over clarity. When you start saying yes because saying no feels dangerous. When you stop defending your silence because you're tired of being misunderstood. You didn't break. You bled out through the cuts you never treated. Through the silence you didn't protect. True masculine energy doesn't vanish. It gets buried under patterns that don't belong to you. And the tragedy isn't just the loss. It's the fact that no one tells you it's happening. You keep showing up. You keep giving. You keep believing that patience will eventually be rewarded. But all it does is train the world to forget your presence. Zeno of Citium didn't start his philosophy in comfort. He began after a shipwreck, after losing everything. And maybe that's what it takes. Maybe the real man doesn't emerge until the false one is stripped bare. Maybe what you call your lowest point was really your return. Because once the roles, the performance, and the people-pleasing are gone, what's left is what's real. That's where Stoicism begins. Not in detachment, but in grounded self-ownership. You don't stop feeling. You stop leaking. Seneca once said, "Sometimes even to live is an act of courage." He wasn't speaking to the loud, to the celebrated. He was speaking to the man who keeps showing up day after day, while quietly losing parts of himself in relationships, routines, and compromises. No one questions. This isn't about fighting harder. It's about refusing to bleed quietly for people who don't honor your depth. What follows is not an attack. It's a reckoning. Not with others, but with the behaviors that taught the world to forget your weight. This is about recovering the core rhythm you abandoned the day you stopped standing still, the day you stopped walking away, the day you stopped saying enough without raising your voice. This is about dignity, the kind that doesn't shout, the kind that doesn't need applause, the kind that returns when a man chooses silence over pleading, boundaries over comfort, stillness over chaos. What you're about to hear isn't theory, it's memory, the kind you feel in your bones because somewhere inside, you know it already. Let's begin. It starts small, a misunderstood moment, a pause in the conversation, a raised eyebrow from someone who never earned your vulnerability, and suddenly you're explaining, not because they deserve the clarity, but because a part of you needs to feel understood. It feels harmless, even honorable. You think it's keeping the peace, but it's not. It's trading presence for approval. And the more you explain, the more they forget your weight. Over-explaining is not communication. It's an emotional surrender disguised as articulation. It says, "Please don't judge me," when you should be saying nothing at all. It tells people your truth is negotiable, your silence is unsure, and your decisions are open for debate. And over time, it teaches the world something dangerous, that your voice doesn't carry authority, that your clarity needs permission, that your boundaries are soft. You might think you're just trying to connect, but your nervous system is in survival mode. The fear of rejection hijacks your instincts. Your words rush out not to reveal you, but to protect you. And every time you speak from fear, something sacred erodes. Masculine energy isn't loud. It doesn't plead. It doesn't justify. It simply is, sovereign, grounded, and whole, with or without understanding. Zeno of Citium didn't argue. He didn't write long rebuttals. He taught with silence, with paradox, with presence. His philosophy wasn't in explanation. It was in how little he felt the need to explain. That's where masculine energy lives, in the stillness that says, "I know who I am. I know what I meant. I don't need you to catch up." If they misunderstand you, let them. If they demand justification, let them wait. If they walk away, let them. Every time you hold your silence in the face of confusion, you rebuild what over-explaining has stolen. Your self-respect, not the version shaped by applause, the one that needs no audience. Because true power doesn't speak to be understood. It speaks when silence has done its part, and if no one listens, it speaks to itself, quietly, firmly, and with no apology. There's a certain kind of man who always says yes, not because he agrees, not because he wants to, but because the thought of disappointing someone terrifies him more than the weight of betraying himself. He's the dependable one, the understanding one, the one who always shows up, even when no one shows up for him. And at first, the world thanks him, but eventually, it forgets him, because a man who never says no becomes invisible in his own life. Saying yes to everything is not generosity. It's fear wearing a smile. The fear of being seen as cold, selfish, distant. But deeper than that, it's the fear of being left. So he compromises. He bends. He nods, even when his body says no. Until one day, he looks around and realizes he's living a life that doesn't reflect him. A life filled with obligations, not choices, agreements, not convictions, and a quiet resentment builds, not toward others, but toward himself. Masculine energy isn't about how much you can carry. It's about knowing what you must refuse, not to punish, but to preserve. Boundaries are not walls to keep others out. They are doors that only open when your dignity is welcome inside. And when those doors are left open for everyone, they stop meaning anything. You stop meaning anything. There's a trauma pattern called the fawning response. When you appease to stay safe, you say yes, not to connect, but to survive. It feels like virtue. It feels like love, but it's not. It's the slow death of self-respect in the name of peace. And the worst part? No one sees it happening, because you're the good guy, the reliable one, the man who always understands, even when no one understands him. But here's the truth. A man who can't say no is not strong. He's scared. And the moment he realizes that is the moment everything changes. Because your first no will feel like betrayal, but it's actually rebirth. The rebirth of your center, your spine, your masculine rhythm. You don't owe the world your constant availability. You don't have to explain why your energy is sacred. You don't need to carry what isn't yours. And if someone walks away because you said no, let them. Better to lose them than to keep losing yourself. There's a kind of silence that doesn't bring peace. It brings dullness, the kind of life where nothing hurts, but nothing sharpens either. You wake up, you move through your day, you survive. But the edge is gone. The hunger, the friction that once made you feel alive. You told yourself you earned the right to rest. But what crept in wasn't rest. It was erosion disguised as ease. Comfort is dangerous when it becomes the goal, because the masculine doesn't thrive in safety. It awakens in challenge, in purpose, in resistance. When everything becomes soft, the couch, the conversation, the convictions, the man begins to forget who he is. He doesn't collapse. He simply fades, slowly, quietly, unnoticed, even by himself. Masculinity isn't chaos. It's order born in pressure. It's peace earned through struggle. And when you remove that struggle, when you remove the heat, you don't just lose difficulty, you lose definition. A man without friction is a man without outline, and without outline, he disappears, not to the world, but to himself. Zeno didn't seek pain, but he rejected ease. He walked barefoot not to suffer, but to stay present, to feel every step, every stone, because that's how a man remembers his weight, by not dulling it with softness. He embraced simplicity, not to punish himself, but to purify his direction, to make sure that what guided him wasn't comfort but clarity. You were not made for a padded life. You were made to carry weight, not everyone's weight, your own. And when you stop carrying it, when you let comfort numb your purpose, you start mistaking quiet for peace. But peace without presence is just silence, and silence without strength is just absence. The question is not whether life is easy. The question is whether you've become too comfortable to care, whether the man who once chased purpose now just avoids pain, whether the fire in you has become smoke, or whether you're still willing to walk barefoot when it matters, not because it's noble, not because it's heroic, but because you remember who you are when the ground hurts a little. He tells himself he's being careful, that he's weighing all the options, that waiting is wisdom, but behind all the overthinking, all the analyzing, all the delayed moves, is fear, the kind that wears the mask of logic, the kind that convinces a man he's being smart when really he's just stalling, because deep down, he doesn't trust what will happen if he acts, or worse, he doesn't trust what will happen if he's wrong. Indecision feels safe, it feels mature, but it rots something sacred, because every moment you delay what you already know in your gut, you fracture your own trust, not with others, with yourself. And once that fracture deepens, doubt becomes your compass. Every choice becomes a battle, every step a negotiation. You forget how to move without questioning the ground beneath you. Masculine clarity doesn't come from knowing everything. It comes from knowing enough to move, quietly, with direction, with weight. A man doesn't wait for full certainty because certainty never comes. He waits for alignment, for the moment the noise inside him settles just enough to take the next step. Then he steps, not in rush, not in panic, but in presence. Epictetus said, "Don't explain your philosophy, embody it." In other words, stop talking about what matters to you and start living it. A decision made in silence, from principle, says more than hours of deliberation. And when your body starts trusting that you'll act, even when it's uncomfortable, something returns. Posture, calm, containment, the spine of masculine presence. Neuroscience will tell you what you already know, that chronic indecision eats away at confidence. It rewires the mind to associate choice with danger, but you don't need a study to feel that. You've lived it. Every time you hesitated too long, every time you lost momentum, every time you talked yourself out of something your heart was already ready for. At some point, caution becomes cowardice, not because you lack courage, but because you've been trained to distrust your own voice. And reclaiming that voice isn't about moving fast. It's about moving anyway, slowly, quietly, but without apology. Because a man who waits forever never leads, and a man who never leads forgets how to follow through on his own life. He thought he was helping, thought that by holding her pain, he was proving his love, thought that being the strong one meant absorbing every storm, every silence, every shift in mood she didn't have the words to explain. And maybe in the beginning it felt noble, masculine, protective, but what it became was something else entirely. A slow, quiet erosion of his energy, until he didn't recognize the weight he was carrying, or the man beneath it. Emotional caretaking isn't strength, it's sacrifice without reciprocity. And over time, it becomes a way of life. You stop checking in with your own needs. You start managing someone else's emotional state like it's your full-time job. You regulate for both. You carry both, until your nervous system forgets what rest feels like. And when that happens, you don't just lose energy, you lose identity. The truth is, not every wound is yours to hold. Not every breakdown is yours to repair. And being emotionally available doesn't mean being emotionally consumed. Masculine presence isn't about carrying everyone's pain. It's about being rooted enough not to drown in it. It's about standing firm while others decide whether or not to find their ground. There's a story that repeats itself more than you'd think. The husband who tried to heal her wounds until he became one of them. Not because he failed, but because he never asked himself what it was costing him. Because he believed his ability to endure was the same as his ability to lead. But enduring someone's chaos without boundaries doesn't make you a safe man. It makes you a disappearing one. The nervous system can't survive on empathy alone. It needs grounding. It needs recovery. It needs space. And when a man gives and gives without anchoring himself, what he offers stops being a gift. It becomes depletion. And no one, not her, not you, wins when you're running on empty. There's a moment when you stop, not out of resentment, but recognition. When you realize that love without boundaries isn't love, it's martyrdom. And masculinity is not about burning quietly for others. It's about burning steadily from within, not to warm the world, but to light the path back to yourself. It sounds mature. It looks noble. To be the one who steps back first, who lets things slide, who offers the olive branch before the wound has even stopped bleeding. But often what looks like peace is just silence, bought too early, too cheaply. And that kind of peace doesn't heal. It haunts, because you didn't make peace with the truth. You made peace with your own erasure. The masculine spirit has a tendency to retreat, not because it's weak, but because it's tired. Tired of conflict, tired of tension, tired of not being heard, even when it speaks calmly. So it folds. It says fine when it means not yet. It agrees before it's ready. It shakes hands when its chest is still aching. And what it calls resolution is really resignation, a quiet collapse, dressed in politeness. But some battles aren't meant to be avoided. They're meant to be walked through, not with violence, not with volume, but with presence, with honesty, with boundaries that say, this is as far as I go without myself. When you skip that, when you try to seal the wound too soon, you don't stop the bleeding, you just bury it. The masculine doesn't need to win every fight, but it needs to show up to the ones that matter. Not for ego, for integrity. Because early reconciliation often means losing something you didn't mean to give up. Your voice, your conviction, your emotional truth. And once those things are handed over, it's hard to know where you end and they begin. Stoic silence is not avoidance, it's selection. It's the refusal to speak where words have no weight. But that silence must come after the truth is honored, not before. Otherwise, it's not silence. It's suppression, and suppressed truths don't vanish. They calcify. They settle in your chest, in your posture, in your dreams. You're not weak for wanting peace, but if the cost of that peace is your clarity, your dignity, or your emotional reality, then what you've bought isn't peace. It's performance, and no man was born to perform his way through pain. You were born to meet it, to walk through it, and to decide. With calm and courage when silence is earned, and when it's just a disguise. He didn't plan to react. It just happened. A glance, a tone, a pause too long, and suddenly, he was inside the storm, explaining, defending, reacting to every flicker of tension like it was a test he couldn't afford to fail. He thought he was being present, thought responding meant caring, but what it really meant was that his emotions weren't grounded, they were exposed, always just beneath the surface, waiting to be hijacked by the next unexpected shift. Masculine energy doesn't drown in emotion. It holds it, not by shutting down, but by containing. Containment isn't suppression. It's structure. It's the ability to feel without being overrun, to notice without needing to fix, to remain still even as the world around you tries to provoke movement. That's not coldness. That's control, and real control is quiet, steady, deep. The mistake most men make isn't feeling too much. It's letting those feelings lead the room. When your emotional center is constantly leaking, the people around you stop trusting your stillness. They stop leaning into you because they sense you're already leaning out. They sense that your reactions can be triggered, not invited. And once that happens, your masculine presence begins to fracture. Zeno wasn't silent because he didn't feel. He was silent because he had mastered what he felt. His calm wasn't detachment, it was power. In a world filled with noise, his composure became presence. Not emptiness, depth. And that depth came from choosing which storms to enter, which moments to absorb, and which silences to protect with everything he had. Being emotionally aware is not weakness, but emotional hyper-responsiveness is not strength. A man who reacts to everything eventually becomes accountable for nothing, because no one can follow his lead if he keeps being pulled in every direction. His words lose weight, his gestures lose meaning, and his soul, it begins to lose shape. Real masculine presence doesn't explode. It contains. It holds space. It waits for the feeling to settle before it moves, because direction matters more than immediacy. And a man who moves with direction, even slowly, will always go further than the one who moves in reaction to every wave. You don't need to harden to contain. You need to anchor. And when you do, when you stop reacting and start choosing, the world doesn't just see your strength. It feels it, quietly, unshakably, without needing to ask where it came from. Masculine energy doesn't disappear in one moment. It doesn't collapse in public. It bleeds quietly in private, through the little choices, the tolerated disrespect, the half-truths, the silence you gave to avoid conflict, the instincts you ignored just to keep the peace. You didn't lose your strength all at once. You gave it away in pieces, hoping each piece would buy you love, safety, or clarity. But all it bought was fatigue. Zeno of Citium lost everything in a shipwreck, stripped of status, comfort, identity. He could have drowned in despair, but he didn't. He rebuilt, not from comfort, but from principle. He didn't recreate the man he was. He forged someone new, someone who no longer relied on status to feel strong, someone who chose stillness over explanation, presence over performance, depth over display. Masculinity doesn't begin in dominance. It begins in return, in the quiet decision to come back to yourself. Not the loud, reactive self the world taught you to wear, but the grounded one, the steady one, Idai. The version of you that doesn't chase validation, doesn't shrink from confrontation, and doesn't explain what's already been earned in silence. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. What you think, you become. What you tolerate, you inherit." what you excuse. You embody every weak behavior, every moment of surrender dressed as compassion, every silence born of fear, every yes born of guilt. It colors you, darkens your outline, or sharpens it, and over time, you either fade or you return with edge. Picture this: a man removing a coat he never chose, a coat stitched together by approval, by fear, by softness that numbed instead of protected. He doesn't tear it off. He doesn't rage. He removes it thread by thread, not to become someone new, but to remember who he was before the world asked him to disappear. What's revealed is not aggression. It's clarity, a presence that doesn't explain, doesn't justify, and doesn't beg. This isn't about acting stronger. It's not about performance. It's about becoming empty, empty of roles, empty of reactions, empty of habits that never belonged to you, so your presence can finally speak again, so your boundaries can walk ahead of you, so your silence can say more than your explanations ever could. You haven't lost your masculine energy. It's just been buried. And now it's time to dig, quietly, fully, without apology.